and Commerce to order. Would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd,
Present.
Alderman Moore, Alderman Vaccaro, Alderman Cone, Alderman Muhammad,
Here.
Alderman Oldenburg,
Present.
Alderwoman Middlebrook,
Present.
Chairwoman Davis.
Present.
6 present, you have quorum.
Thank you. I do have one excused alderperson, Shane Cone. I'll also excuse Samuel Moore. Chair asks for approval of the minutes.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes, although I don't have it in front of me,
From September 24th.
of September 24th.
Second.
It's been moved and second to approve the minutes of September 24th. As you had the opportunity to peruse them several days prior, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I only heard one aye. Call the roll, please.
Alderman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderman Moore, Alderman Vaccaro, Alderman Cone, Alderman Muhammad,
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg,
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook,
Aye.
Chair Lady Davis.
Aye.
6 aye votes.
We have a full agenda for today, so I'm going to reverse the agenda so we can move one of these items out of the way, which will probably empty half of the room afterwards. So, as required, we are having a presentation and update on Fly 314. The committee will have the opportunity to ask any questions after the presentation is done, so please take your notes so that you can ask any questions that you have concern on. Our presenter today will be Paul Payne, with the assistance, if needed, from any other members of the communication staff or others. It's all yours.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I actually have a handout for you. I'll let that go around the room a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay, what I'm here to do today is give you a briefing on where we are and where we've been in this process, what we've done up to date, where we are today, and what looking forward. This is the same presentation I made to ENA at yesterday's ENA meeting. So it's just starting a recap of the process to date. We're currently entering the 14th month of exploration. That goes back to August of last year when we first started meeting with the consultants in this process. And as discussed earlier, we were working along a specific work areas, topic areas that we refer to as work streams. The first being airport due diligence. And what the airport due diligence work stream has been in charge with is basically compiling a lot of the financial and operational information related to the airport. And what this information has been used for is for modeling and projections in terms of negotiating with airlines and such. A lot of this has been done with the assistance of Rhonda, director of the airport, and her team, helping pull all that together. So that's been a major task in just getting the information together that's needed for this proceeding on this project. Secondly, on community outreach and communications, in the early going, we had a lot of outreach related to both residents, flyers, resident phone interviews. We did passenger interviews, questionnaires, and some outreach meetings. And then, of course, on occasion, when we have these kind of updates to Board of E&A and the Transportation Committee. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk about some of that saying, hey, well, why is it in closed session and things when we have information to give out? And I think when you're in an environment, when you're talking about a potential bidding situation, that's just the nature of that beast. And so to the extent that we can put information out related to all this, we do, and it's posted on the website as well. And you see a lot of information on the website. But there are certain parts of the communications that obviously related to competitive bidding process that would not be public yet. Under the airline use agreement, airport lease, we had a meeting with the FAA back in July of 2018. That was to inform them that we were proceeding with the process. And then since the first of the year, we've had many months of negotiating with the airlines, which resulted in a preliminary framework. Basically, that's just sort of an agreement to proceed with the process and exploring the P3 lease option, as well as that, and that was important because we needed that as groundwork for issuing the RFQ, which is what we did this past month. In the market work stream, we've basically established a base level of capital expenditures that are needed at the airport. That's actually, which is a document that's also online, and that's, we identified up to $900 million plus in improvements that would be needed over the next 10 to 15 years. And then also conducted financial modeling, both under an as-is as well as a P3 lease scenarios, just to give us an idea about what kind of valuations we could be looking at. And that would inform our use agreement negotiations, as well as giving us an idea of wanting to proceed with the RFQ. And finally, we drafted the RFQ document. Under existing debt and finance, which is another work stream, one of the requirements under this process is that all outstanding debt in the airport would be retired if we go with a lease operation or a lease agreement. And so that requires a lot of due diligence in terms of identifying all the outstanding debt and what would be required to either pay them off or defease them. And then it also means keeping the bond marketplace informed of those developments. Things like EMA notices and all, you hear about that. That's just to keep them apprised of where we are in the process. And in terms of legal and compliance, any legal questions that came up, we also have a team that addresses that, particularly sunshine law compliance and all. And then recently, we issued a development of a preliminary program to assist and support airport employees. As you know, that was to give some guarantees to existing airport employees about their employment should a lease come about. That was developed with much assistance from the legal and compliance workstream. In terms of the status of the process today, as I mentioned, we had issued an RFQ on October 4th. Now, what an RFQ is, all that is basically inviting those teams that may be interested and then would have the financial and operational capacity to put in a bid to this process or be capable of participating in this process. And those responses are due by November 1st at the end of the day. And in the meantime, we've received various requests for potential follow-up questions and related to that document, and those have also been posted online. The RFQ, by the way, is a document that's been posted online as well. In the meantime, we'll be working on key documents related to potential RFP issuance, and those would be things like the lease agreement, operating standards, the airline use agreement, which is basically filling in any of the details related. The framework establishes, again, just a framework for what the airlines would be anticipating, but the use agreement would establish all those details. And then community outreach, we're planning on additional community meetings. We actually have 3 scheduled for the next week. One at Carpenter Library on December 29th, 6 to 7:30 p.m. One at Schlafly Library on Wednesday, October 30th, 7 to 8:30 p.m. And then one in Walnut Park Library on Saturday, November 2nd at 2 to 3:30 p.m. Those are also posted online. In terms of steps to come, mentioned there is a new timetable which you can also find on the website. You can look down below. We're currently, as I said, we're at our 14th month. The estimated evaluation time frame for the RFQ, once we get responses, including the time we get responses, would be 45 to 60 days. So you're looking around somewhere around the end of November, which would inform us on whether we issue the RFP, which would be sometime in early December. So that basically you're getting all the information from any potential respondents on the RFQ and deciding whether that's sufficient to proceed with an RFP. And still, the total process, when we talked about this, would be an 18 to 24-month period, and we're still within that time frame. But again, if you proceed through each step, and if you go through that, you'll probably be talking somewhere at the end of next year for any potential consummation of any deal. But you can see the various stages in the illustration on the page there for each, the length of each step, and when we'd be deciding to go forward with each of those steps. So that's just basically a summary of where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed. I'm available for any questions you have on this particular issue. Again, we do have a lot of material that's been posted online, and any information that you would require or would like to have, we could get for you in particular. And I'll just open it up for any questions.
While we're, did you have an opportunity to sign in, Paul?
I did not.
And anyone else who's going to speak on Fly 314 needs to sign up, or else I won't recognize you to speak later on. Also, we want to make sure that when we talk about online, we have a lot of comments about all of the general public not having access to online information. And so one of the things that I think is very, very important for us is to establish something else. And I've talked about that, and I think that we're working on a couple of remedies for that. And I don't know if you want to speak on that or LaJuan wants to speak on that, but we've been talking about that, and we know we have to do something else. And so I don't want people to think that we have not heard that, but that I think is very important. So I didn't know if you had any comments on that, Paul.
I didn't in particular, but I do know that we've been talking about that with regard to the community meetings, in particular going out with hard copies of the postings and making sure that other venues, whether it's posting on Nextdoor or what have you, some way of getting
I'm really in favor of Nextdoor.
of getting the message out so that people know when these meetings would take place and they can participate. I don't know if anyone else. LaJuan, what's that?
I said what you said was correct. Like, we were going to just make sure we have.
LaJuan, we can't
come
hear
on
you
up.
back there.
If you wanted.
It's just making sure that we have everything available in hard copy everywhere we go, in addition to looking at other avenues to advertise, because I know we're doing a lot of online advertising, and like I said before, we knocked on doors to advertise, but we're looking at other avenues, potentially radio is what we're still trying to explore. We're still cost prohibitive. We're trying to make sure that we don't just waste a lot of money finding other ways, but we want to make sure that if anyone needs access to anything, we'll do hard copy. And also, if you request something either through your alderman, alderwoman, or whoever, we can also mail things to people if they just want to know. So we're trying to make ourselves as accessible as possible.
Okay. LaJuan, could you state your name and then sign in as well, please?
I signed in already, ma'am. My name is LaJuan Strickland. I'm the owner of Metropolitan Strategies and Solutions and part of the communications work stream for the airport working group.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
We also have Stephanie Lewis here is also signed in case we have additional
Okay.
questions, and Glenn Muskowski of Mullis.
Okay, so I will take that opportunity. If any of them who have signed in for Fly 314 presentation would like to come forward and add anything to what has been said, now is the time. Okay, so Stephanie Lewis.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Lewis. I'm Vice President with Grow, Missouri, on the advisory team and part of the communications work stream. I would like to say that we are part of the team that handles the presentations and going to the community and making the community aware of the activities so far and where we're going in the process. As it's been stated, we have several meetings coming up in October, and as requested, we will add additional meetings as the community asks.
Okay. Anything else?
I think that's it. Any
All
other
right, thank
questions?
you.
Okay.
I see that we have Glenn, you're signed up. Would you like to come forward and add anything? State your name for us.
Glenn Muskowski. I'm with Moelis & Company. We're the lead financial advisor to the city on the potential public-private partnership in connection with the airport. I think Paul covered everything very comprehensively. I think the only thing I'd add is that preliminary conversations we're having with potential participants suggest a healthy level of enthusiasm for the process and excitement about the opportunity. The people who we believe will respond to the RFQ represent a very highly qualified set of operators and infrastructure investors from around the world, and we're quite pleased with the level of enthusiasm for the process that the city is executing so far.
Okay. All right. So I'd like to start with the committee to see if you have any questions, and you can feel free to ask anybody who has spoken to answer a question for you. So let me start with Alderman Boyd.
Sure, I have comments and questions. Kind of impressed with the community outreach. 21,000 residents face-to-face interviews is, wow. I'm kind of curious, is that all city residents, city, county residents? What does that look like?
It's all city residents. The 21,000 was from city. Then we did about 1,600 phone that included county, city, county, St. Clair County, and St. Charles County.
And I'm taking this as a survey. Right?
Correct. Yeah, you probably saw folks. They worked for Metropolitan Strategies and Solutions. We employed over 40 city residents to actually go door to door. We also paid them a living wage according to the contract they required us to, and they went through door to door. And we wrapped up the field surveys. I want to say early February, late January of this year. And so we had 197,000 unique knocks. And so some people we went back multiple times if we didn't get them the first go around. But they were all city residents, all validated addresses, and all of that. Like I said, they were out rain, sleet, or snow. I think we only took 2 days off during that time period of the fall of last year and through the winter.
Can you break that data out by neighborhoods?
Definitely. I could share. I think the report is online, but it's probably buried in archive. But we can send the actual report to everyone on the committee if that's all right with you. Okay.
Okay. And Paul, I guess, so there's an RFQ process, and so there's a request for qualifications, and is there expectation on how many people? Is it you gonna select one person, 2 people, 3 people? How many would shake out of that?
Well, actually, with an RFQ, basically you're looking to see try to welcome as many who would be qualified to participate, because that creates the competitive environment you're looking for and trying to go to the next step. So, yeah, I don't want to characterize yet, maybe Glenn could, but about how many would be likely to respond at this point. But we're as Glenn mentioned, that just from informally discussing it with the investment community, there seems to be significant interest. So,
And just because they submit their qualifications doesn't necessarily mean they're qualified to do what you might want.
there's a process. There would be a process of basically going through their submission and making sure that they meet criteria, mostly financial and operational, both.
Okay, and from the RFQs, the people that are selected from the RFQ that meet the qualifications, basically, then they would be the ones to submit RFPs.
They would be invited to participate in the next stage, should we get to that point, yes.
Okay. Should you get to that point?
Yeah. Basically, you would expect it when you get to this point where you're going to say, hey, as long as you've got a successful let's say if we are successful in getting a batch that is qualified to proceed, then that gives you, that informs you onto the next step. So each step sort of informs you about how you proceed to the next step.
Let me ask you this, Paul. The end goal is to get a group of proposals to choose from. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Glenn, did you have anything else you want to add to that as far as the market is concerned? Okay. Okay. Next is Alderman Vaccaro. Okay. Alderman Muhammad.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And this may be a question about Paul, but has anybody responded to the RFQ yet?
No, the responses are due November 1st.
Okay. And so going back to this community outreach, and I have to agree with the Alderman from the 22nd, because I haven't seen the community outreach within my community or within North St. Louis, quite frankly. And when I receive questions asking what is the update, what's the status, what's going on with this process, and I can't really answer because honestly, aldermen have been left out in the dark as well on this process. Kind of feel like I'm playing catch up here. Can you walk me through that community outreach again? You probably did when I stepped out, so I apologize. But can you walk me through what that community outreach looked like?
Well, it was a combination of different things. First, we started by going door to door. Like I said, there was 197,000 different knocks, and a lot of it was in the 21st as well. And and it's all broken down in the report that I think we shared it a long time ago, but we'll make sure you guys all have it fresh. And of the 197,000 unique knocks, we ended up talking to about 21,000 residents from all areas of the city. And I think it was Alderman Vaccaro that had recommended that we split up, not just look at the one ward at a time, but do 3 wards simultaneously. And so what we did was we broke the city into 3 different geographical areas: North St. Louis, Central, and South. And so we had a team in each of these geographical areas simultaneously. So while there's someone knocking doors in the Central, there was someone in the North and the South all at the same time, just to make sure that we touched everyone, and that the data came in not skewed. Because like a data is just a snapshot in time, and if you only knock, say, the South at one time, your data is going to look one way, and then you go to the Central, then the North. So we wanted the data to come in kind of simultaneously, just so we had good representation of the entire city. But we talked to everyone, and then we also did over 20 community meetings too as well. Some of them were already established meetings that we were just invited to go speak at. Some were manufactured on our own. But we tried our best to try to touch anyone and everyone. And in some special areas, we even got out and knocked around that particular community site just to make sure that people knew to attend these meetings.
Absolutely.
We left no one out, and like myself, I live in the 18th. I wanted to make sure that residents of the North Side were able to participate in this process as much as they wanted to.
Absolutely. So just for transparency, so if you're knocking on my door, I mean, I've seen the postcards.
Yep.
I don't think that's equivalent to actual information.
True.
Or actual outreach. But of course, everybody doesn't answer their door.
Correct.
So if you knock on my door and I answer, what would you say to me?
Well, there was an actual script that was approved by the working group, and a lot of it was just, it was more generic information of just trying to figure out what the relationship of the airport to the city, what do you know about the process as it stands, that the city was going through this process. And we're firm believers that the owners of this airport are the residents of the city of St. Louis, and we wanted to make sure that we talked to them all. As many of them that we can, to let them know that this process is going on. So it was not a poor survey to get someone to lean a particular way or not. It was really just to grab information of who they are, how often do they use the airport, do they know someone that works there. We were really just trying to figure out what the residents of St. Louis knew about the airport and its relationship to the city.
Okay. Thank you. Paul, just my last question, Madam Chair. Can you, I know a lot of this jargon I don't understand here.
Okay,
So can you just walk me through these key documents that you have, lease agreement, airline use agreement, and the operating standards? can you spell out independently what each document exactly means as it relates to this process?
Okay. The lease agreement would be any potential, would actually be the lease itself from any potential operator. So basically, that's a rather complicated document, and so when you have to start working to make sure that because all of the specifications of what would be required should you pursue this to its fruition are met. And so basically, you're laying out the terms for what a potential operator would need to meet in order to enter into a lease with the city, to operate the airport.
Has that been, not to interrupt you, but I am interrupting you.
Okay, go ahead.
Has that document been drafted yet, or some preliminary?
No,
some
right
draft,
now,
maybe?
right now it's more of because that's going to take a while, but that's more of an educational process, particularly for the working group. What we're doing is reviewing key components of that, and the consultants are walking us through what we would expect to see in a lease document, and what requirements would need to be met, and then that gets filled into a actual document in the end. So it's basically, we're learning, we're being informed about what the components would be, and then they end up with a document at some time in this process.
Okay.
Okay, the airline use agreement, as I mentioned, I mentioned a framework, basically, that we currently have, which is basically the airlines have agreed that they agree to proceed with the exploration, so they're on board with that potential piece. But it's not written, there's not a firm agreement, and there's not any detail specific about various operating standards and things like that we expect from the airlines and they expect from any potential operator. Well, those also need to be specified, and it's similar to that, so that's how the relationship between the airport and the airlines that operate at the airport is defined, and it's very specific. So that's what the airline use agreement does. And then finally, the operating standards are what we expect of the lease, of any potential leaseholder at the airport, to how to operate the airport, and and it can be various requirements, both some of which are federal and state statutory, and others are just simply the city of St. Louis expects these type of things from any operator at the airport in terms of customer service and things like that. Those things would be within the operating standards. And that, again, that's another complex document that we are currently right now in the process of reviewing components in a general level. What would we expect to see? And then those need to get filled out in an actual document. And that hasn't been done yet, but that's what we're moving toward.
Now, my last question, Madam Chair. Now, with the working group, has there been any discussion on exactly what these operating standards look like? Or has there been any that has been formulated or agreed upon or approved?
Yeah, not yet. Basically, where we're at right now is saying what we would expect to see. So in other words, what components of a potential operating standards what do we expect to see in an operating standard agreement? All right, so whether it's, again, like I said, whether it's a customer service thing or whether it's meeting the federal guidelines and all, what sections would exist in that kind of document? So that they sort of establish that of what we would expect to see. And then that gets filled in with the details. So we're on the very early stages of that kind of document, but that's just a process we have to go through. But part of that process is identifying the components of each of those documents. And then we get into the details of, okay, having defined this component, what's in that component? And that's where we're at.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Director. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Alderman Oldenburg.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. A couple of quick questions. Under Market D, the second bullet point, Paul, financial modeling conducted under as-is and P3 lease scenarios.
Correct.
What are some of those lease scenarios? Is that terms? Is that possessory, taking possessory rights of certain things or not? What else would
Lease
would
scenarios
be
would be, okay, so what would you look at in how much of a capital expenditures might occur at the airport? Let's say that you want to have a scenario where you want to have a new terminal or something like that, or this kind of scenario which you have some other different arrangement at the airport, how it's arranged in terms of where gates are aligned, those type of things. Those are the kind of scenarios to say that might have an impact on the finances or the projections.
Okay. Okay, makes sense, thank you.
Alderwoman Middlebrook?
I have no questions.
Okay. I just have a couple things that I would like to suggest when you send the communications back to this committee. Could you begin that with those 11 qualifications that were initial with the application, so that people know exactly what we're working from?
The guiding principles.
Guiding principles. Also, could you also provide, when you break down the analysis on how many persons were contacted by ward, could you also, I'm not sure if you captured this or not, but let us know as much as you can about the surveys that you did at the airport, like, you know, how it's the makeup of it, you know. I don't know if you just interview people and it's just an interview and none of them were quantified in any other category, but if they were, please add that to it too, okay? And you said something, LaJuan, not only did you pay a living wage, you pay way above a living wage. If it wasn't illegal, I would have been doing it, okay? And you also pay for childcare too. So it was a good opportunity for people that were looking for something to do, most especially when you're a student or a stay-at-home mom and you got an extra 3 or 4 hours and you could go out and make some money for your family. So I do appreciate that you handled that in a fashion that was very respectable, okay? Any other questions? Has anybody thought of something else that you need to say? Okay, from the committee, no. There are other alderpersons and any other alderpersons have any questions? No? Come on.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My question for you, Mr. Paul Payne, and for the working group about the community outreach. In addition to looking for that information by zip code or by ward, have we done any outreach and included the business community in any of these working communications, conversations, et cetera? Because, you know, certainly our residents are impacted by the airport, but, you know, the airport really serves to drive economic activity for our region, and our business community is vital, you know, is a vital component of that overall. The success of the airport and the success of our city and region.
Yeah.
Alderwoman, I'm glad you asked that question. We actually did a lot of business outreach. Some of those were not posted on our calendar because they were asked not to, because it was, some of them were one-on-one, some of them were actually invited to different groups that already assemble. But we also plan to do more outreach, because the first time around we had stuff to talk about, but not a whole lot. We have a lot more substance since the last time we went back to the business community. And in our latest communications plan that's on the website right now, it shows that we will have some more targeted meetings toward the businesses. But we do agree with you, is that the businesses are going to be affected, those that fly through this airport most of the time. And so we want to make sure that we include them every step of the way.
Something else that was brought to our attention recently is as members of St. Louis County Port Authority and others have started to engage. We've heard from several mayors of surrounding municipalities. Have we conducted any outreach to any residents or any people, businesses, elected officials, or otherwise outside of the city? Although we here in the city of St. Louis own the airport, we certainly serve a much broader public than just our residents.
We did the 1,600 first. 1,600 surveys via phone was to everyone. That was including the city, the county, St. Charles County, and St. Clair County. For the businesses, all the businesses were regional businesses that we worked with. So they crossed over from city to county to all over to actually national companies. So we do plan to do more outreach to the business community. We haven't really decided on what we're going to do in terms of some of the businesses that are around the airport. We want to do some target focus outreach to them, but we're still working through that now. So you should stay tuned as we make modifications to this communications plan. We'll make sure that the committee knows what we plan to do.
I think it would be really helpful to have some kind of reports, as the chairwoman was requesting, by zip code perhaps, when we were talking about areas outside of the city. Certainly some kind of understanding of what engagement with the business community has already been conducted would certainly be helpful for us to understand. Because as the as the alderman from the 21st mentioned, I think my community feels largely left out of the conversation. That's not to say that they have been, and so certainly your report would be helpful in understanding that.
Let me start on answering that. Some of those business entities, they don't want their names divulged, and we won't do that. We won't do that. Also, the most significant large bodies that represent our economic base are very well informed, and we have mentioned that online in all of our presentations. Plus, for the individual wards to look at them, I think will give us the answers that we want. I do remember one of the meetings that was actually held in I think, was it the 9th or the 20th?
It was the 9th. It was the 9th. It was not in the 20th. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but it was a good representation there. It
There's
really
residents
was.
from both.
So the immediate areas, different areas of the city, I've been very impressed by the number of people who have attended public meetings. And I'm really impressed by those who actually stay a part of the process, and with emails or texts or whatever, when they don't like something they've heard or read online, they let us know. I appreciate that. I encourage them because they should stay involved. So we will get that information out as much as we can.
That would be very appreciated by myself, and I think several others who had similar questions. Mr. Payne, in your presentation here, you mentioned the establishment of a base level, the market analysis as well as a financial model.
Yes.
Will those two pieces be available to the general public?
Not yet. I mean, simply because it's proprietary information and we're about to enter into a competitive bidding. So that's the kind of thing, as I mentioned earlier in my in my original presentation, talking about there are some things that we talked about in closed session for a reason, and a lot of the financials are one of those things that we don't disclose in an open session simply because there is a competitive bidding process going on.
And will those, the model or the baseline market report ever be available to the public?
Eventually, I mean, at one point or another. I mean, either this, if this process results in an actual lease to the airport, yeah, once that process is complete, everything becomes public information. However, and if it's terminated prior to that, well, then it would become public information, at least most of it, I believe. There's some NDAs related to the airlines, I think, that are out there. But it depends on the outcome of the process.
And will there be some publicly available portion of the report so that the aldermen, the public, the business community, and others can help participate in the evaluation of the bids that are coming before us?
Yeah, as long as there are open bids out there, I don't believe any of the financials would be available. Obviously, if it gets to the point where you have an evaluation of an ordinance or something like that, I'm sure there's going to be some more substantive discussion about that. Now, to the level, I'm not quite sure because we haven't gotten that far in the process, and we haven't even talked about it among our working group about what level of detail in terms of numbers and things would be there. But we got to be careful when you're in a competitive bidding process so that you don't give any particular parties certain advantages when you're having those kind of discussions.
That's all I have. Thank you for the opportunity to answer or to ask questions, Madam Chairwoman.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. Is there anyone else right now under this discussion who has any comments on Fly 314 in the audience? This is your final opportunity. Anybody wants to speak about their like or dislike or a question about it, this is the time. Because once I move into my board bills, we will not be talking about Fly 314. So anybody else want to speak? You want to speak? Did I see another hand? Well, we're discussing Fly 314, we're giving an update. And I'm also giving an opportunity, if there was someone in the room who just simply needs to voice their opinion, that they just don't like it, this is the time, you can say that, okay? Because I don't want anybody to show up and think that I just have to sit here and be quiet. This is just an opportunity to speak. And if you have a suggestion, this is the opportunity to speak on that. I will not be talking about Fly 314 when I move on to my bills. So this is it.
And so there will be no discussion with respect to for or against a particular bill that comes before the committee?
It will, if there's a bill that you have interest in on this agenda, then you would speak at that time.
And is the bill in reference to, I know there's one about a public vote, is that bill one of the ones on the agenda?
Yes, that's on here.
Yes.
Yes.
I say my comments to them.
Madam Chairwoman, if you don't mind, if the speaker could identify himself and who he's with for the record.
Adolphus Pruitt, President, NAACP. I'm a resident of the 28th Ward, Alderman Board.
Thank you.
Okay. So,
Madam Chairman, sorry, I did actually have a question.
can you hold on one second? Could you come back to the microphone? Since you said what you said, technically, that does pertain to Fly 314, so feel free to speak now.
Well, let me try to be as clear as possible. I am a little bit concerned about the city's ability to move this process forward and give opportunity for someone or some entity to present something to the city that may, in actuality, provide for not only a more improved airport, both physically and operational, but also provide for a significant amount of resources that can be targeted, specifically some of them, to address the issues that impact the most underserved part of the city of St. Louis, which is North St. Louis. While there's been a lot of talk about, I just heard talk about businesses and their participation in St. Louis County and St. Charles County, and unless I'm mistaken, the China Hub, Midwest China Hub Commission still exists, which is represented by all of those entities who claim that they want to have some say in the airport. I remember the last time we provided them that opportunity, including the state, we were supposed to get a cargo hub and billions of dollars in revenue for the airport and people flying in and out of China and goods and services, and that didn't happen. And so I have very little faith that that same group of individuals, whether they were represented on the commission or those who hold those positions in those prospective counties and regions, would be any better than the team that the city has assembled to date. I don't think they had the expertise they needed then. I have no qualms that the city has the expertise it needs now. As relates to, I have no issue directly as relates to a public vote. My issue with respect to a public vote is, what are we voting on? If such a vote does not quantify what we expect to see in return of a deal or a transaction that's presented to the city, and how those resources are to be distributed and reinvested into the city, then I have no need to vote on my right to vote. I already have a right to vote. The last thing is this, and this is probably even more of a greater concern, is that I want to make sure that we're not reconfiguring how this body, the Board of Aldermen, legislatively operates. As a voter in the city for a very long time, I've relied on voting for my alderperson as a representative of me and my ward to make decisions on our behalf and to work in concert with the other members on the board to a degree that they can get a majority of the board to agree with their position. If each and every time any member of the Board of Aldermen has a problem with achieving that goal and it results to us having the need to continually go to the public to vote on any and all questions that come before the board by the minority members of the board versus the majority opinion, I just think that government is not operating as I envision it, nor as the authors of our charter did at the beginning. And so those are my concerns, and I just wanted to make sure I had the opportunity to voice them, and I appreciate your time.
Hold on, sir. I think you have a question.
Yes.
Go right ahead, Alderman Boyd. Oh, I'm sorry. Alderman Boyd, did you have a question?
Just for the record, Mr. Pruitt, are you a consultant on the project in any way whatsoever for one side or the other? Are you a paid consultant?
No, but I sort of sometimes wish I was.
Especially what they pay.
I just want to be on the record. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Alderman
You bring up some points that I keep bringing up. We cannot delegate our vote away. So even if we took a public vote, it's not binding, because even if every single person votes they want to sell the airport or lease the airport, or every single person votes they want to not lease the airport, it's going to come down to the Board of Aldermen. It's the only vote that's going to actually have a yes or no vote, which speaks to what you were saying with. I think the vote, which I'm fine with the vote, we can have as many as we want. I think they're more just feel-good kind of things, but at the end of it all, we don't really even know if there's going to be a deal, if there's a deal, what's in the deal, how's it going to impact the airport in the sense minority participation and our local, our union participation at the airport, how it affects North St. Louis, South St. Louis, where's the money going? So I think the vote that we put out is, do you think we should sell the airport or not? And everybody might say, no, we shouldn't sell it. Then they find out that, the impact in North St. Louis is going to be good. And so then a lot of the aldermen from North area say, well, even though we had this vote, ultimately our vote is the one that's actually only going to count. But so, the vote is more of just a feel-good thing because the vote won't count.
Yeah, unfortunately, the citizens were not and have not received that information that way, so they believe it will, so it's misleading them, but even more is that anybody who's going to respond to this is going to spend millions of dollars to prepare to present something. And bottom line is, the more we talk about things of this nature where we're appearing to put up obstacles to just receiving an offer, I think we have the ability, or we will in some ways, chase some folks away. And I think that hurts us in the long run versus helps us.
I don't disagree, but it's one of those things everybody keeps saying, we should have a vote, we should have a vote. And even though I've said the only way that a vote would count is if we change the charter, which we can't do for 2 more years, first we'd have to say, okay, we'll have a vote. Then we have to find the money to have a special election to have the vote. And then at the end of the day, it's just voting on, should we sell the airport or not? Because again, we don't even know what we're voting on.
We can't sell the airport.
I'm sorry, lease, lease.
Yes,
At the end of this, we can't, we can't delegate, we can't give our vote, we can't delegate our vote. In other words, if I can't make tomorrow's meeting, I can't say, Mr. Pruitt, can you come in and vote for me tomorrow because I can't be here? We cannot, the attorneys told us that, we cannot delegate our vote away. So I've said all along, I want everybody to understand, and that's sort of why, ma'am, I had some sort of a flu bug last night. I was up all night kind of sick, but I came and I'm going to go to that thing and I'm on the flyer because I want people to understand that that vote is just simply a vote. You would do just as well to call your alderman. You might want to, because what if they agree in the RFP that they're going to have 45% minority participation or 35, or what if they say that they're going to use all union people? I mean, we don't know what's coming out of it.
45% minority participation sounds good.
Right, so you would vote for it, but what if that RFP said 1% minority participation, then you'd vote against it?
That's a bad deal.
I understand, but you don't, but what I'm getting, so what I'm getting at is, we don't know
I
enough
agree.
to know if it's a good deal, bad deal. I support a public vote. At the same time, I just want everybody to understand that the public vote is simply a non-binding referendum because there can't be a binding public vote.
Well, I would hope that if such legislation comes before this committee and the full board, that it would clearly indicate that within the legislation so that as that legislation goes forward, everybody have an understanding of truly what it is they're being asked to vote on and what sort of force and impact it will have whether it's approved or not. I don't think the voters understand that. I hear it all the time. We get calls all the time about it. And they say, well, why don't you want a public vote? And we tell them the same thing, tell you, but more than anything, the question is, the response for us more than anything is, we will wish and hope that folks will let a process reach an end point and somebody put something on the table for us to take a look at and say yes or no one way or the other. If it's 45% minority participation, I'm going to do backwards flips.
There you go.
If it's not, I'm going to say, hey, we need a vote.
Right, well, I mean, at that point, your vote is still going to be with the aldermen.
I agree.
So whatever comes out, no matter how the public vote would go, either which way, it's non-binding. At the end of it, if an RFP goes out, and if an RFP comes back, and then, we don't see that it's beneficial to the city, or it's anti-workforce bill, or an anti-minority bill, or it says, I'd like to somehow make sure that if it comes back to us, we get to keep that $5 million that that we're getting, that we don't lose that. There's things I'd like to see if it came this way, but we're on the same page. I just wanted to say exactly what you're saying, that I've been saying. The vote is going to be, it's strictly a non-binding. We cannot give away, we can't delegate away our vote, no matter to who, to you, to anybody, to everybody. So, the vote has to be however they want to write it, at the end of it, it's a non-binding referendum is what it is.
I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Who's next here? Alderman Muhammad,
No questions, Madam Chair.
Alderman Oldenburg, Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Questions?
Okay. Thank you for your concern.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Rice, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for the opportunity to ask questions. Regarding the RFQ, Mr. Payne, if you would. So the timeline that we have in front of us is a bit less than 30 days for the return of RFQ, right?
Yes.
For a company to respond. Okay. Was that the original timeline set out? Is that a normal timeline for an RFQ of this magnitude?
It varies, given that they've had outreaches to the investment community. They knew this was coming. They just didn't know exactly when. There's been some preliminary work prior to that, but on advice of the consultants, they said that should be a significant amount of time in order to get a fairly good response from this kind
Okay.
of project.
And then as far as the RFQ itself goes, is it sufficiently broad that we are going to get multiple applicants back, that we're going to get responses back?
The indication is yes. Again, you never know until you actually get them, but as Mr. Muskowski talked about earlier, he said they've had some somewhat enthusiastic potential out there.
Okay, and then my last question is, as far as there've been a lot of conversations in the media and around about potential folks being invested sort of on both sides of this. As far as funding the outreach and also having an interest in a company that might put in a bid on this, or even it is legal, but even our former mayor having started this process and then being a part of one of the groups that might be putting in a bid. What are the types of protections that we have throughout this process to prevent against that kind of?
Well, the document, the RFQ document itself spells out some pretty detailed conflict of interest provisions in there, which we actually talked about significantly about a time among ourselves to make sure that that was included in there.
Okay.
And then obviously any proposals that come before us, we review those with those in mind, and any other potential conflicts that we have in mind, and when we evaluate whether or not to certify them as qualified.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Those are my questions. Sure. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. So, I think that all of our, is there anybody else? I thought I saw your hand. Come on.
So I'm Jennifer Elam. I'm just a citizen from the 18th Ward. And I just want to make kind of a comment. I don't know if it's questions, but I feel like, the Board of Aldermen, a few of them mentioned that they feel a little in the dark about this process. The public feels in the dark about this process, both in the city and in the region. And we need to do a better job. I know we heard about the outreach that they're doing, but we need to do a better job than that on outreach. If people aren't reading the Post-Dispatch, and there are a lot of people in this region that do not read the Post-Dispatch because we've kind of moved beyond the regular newspaper sort of way of getting news in this day and age. If they're not reading the Post-Dispatch, if they're not really active on Twitter, they're not knowing about this process. They may have just heard about the airport possibly getting leased. So we're spending a lot of money on this already. And if we continue to move forward with this process unabated, we're going to be spending more and more money. And I know that if we someday get a grand lease from one of these groups, they're supposed to pay back some of that money. But that being above board is really hard to fathom, knowing about all these connections that if you are engaged as a citizen, you do know about. And it's incontrovertible. There's a paper trail for a lot of these connections that are really unseemly. So all I want to say is that we're watching and we're upset that this is already costing us a lot of money in a city where it gets told to us many, many times, we don't have money for this, we don't have money for that. There's a lot of need in this city that needs to be addressed, and I'm not sure putting money towards airport privatization is really where we need to be spending our time and money.
Hold on. Sign in while we're waiting. Alderman Boyd, did you have any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Alderman McCarthy?
I do. I have more of a comment.
Okay.
I also used to live in your ward.
Oh, very good.
I actually still live in a house there.
Oh, very good. But, so I can tell you that even all of everything that's gone on so far has gone on through E&A, through the mayor's office. We haven't had any say. So when you say you're in the dark, we're in the dark too. But at the end of all of this, the only group that you're going to be able to count on to either stop or let this proceed is going to be the aldermen. Because even if we do a vote, and I'm sure if we did a vote today, your vote would be not to sell the airport. but that vote don't count. It counts in the sense that people call, they can say, but it's non-binding.
So I get that.
so-
Can I
well,
comment to that?
Yeah, but I'll finish, just hang on a minute. It won't take me long. So Marlene sits in she's our representative in the meetings that they've gone through, but she doesn't have a say or a vote. She's just there.
But I open my mouth, though, and I'm not
She,
afraid.
right, but she doesn't. So I'll agree with you that we're as much in the dark as anybody. I just want to be clear that a public vote, and I would say the majority of all the public says we should not lease the airport. I'm sorry, the word lease the airport. But I just keep going back over that same circle. It's still a non-binding referendum. And I could tell you from people that have called me from the neighborhood that say, Joe, we're not supportive of that. And I can tell you, I'm not supportive. If I was to vote today, I'd say, we can't do this. But I also want to wait until we get the end process so we know what we're actually saying yes or no to. The vote is more of a feel-good kind of a, but it might let people in mass have some sort of say, but the ultimate vote still is going to come back to the aldermen. And you can go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, okay, so I take your point on that, but with all due respect, when I call my alderman, when I write my alderman, I don't always get a response. I don't always get a feeling that that is an effective process. So that is why I think people want to be able to vote.
Well,
However, I get the point.
I'm all for the vote.
Say we make the case that, voting on this as an entire community, as an entire city, costs too much money and is maybe what you say, a feel-good sort of
Well, it is, because
sort of thing, because it's not the binding thing. Even if we made that case to people, people need to feel like their representatives are going to, in an above-board way, make a decision on this. Because it affects everyone in the city, it affects everyone in the county, it affects people in East St. Louis, it affects people in St. Charles. I mean, it is affecting the entire metropolitan statistical area and Missouri. So really, I mean, if we were really, inclusive about it, we would include a much larger discussion on this.
Well-
And I know that there are those who have said, well, this is a city entity, only the city should weigh in on this. I think that that's a little short-sighted.
But I'm fine if the state, the country votes on it, it still comes down to the 28 aldermen. So no matter how, that's the only point that I keep trying to get, because I know people don't like TIFs. Now, in my ward, there are no TIFs. But we also don't believe TIFs need to be there. But I think if you ask people, should we vote on every TIF? Now, we probably do about 10 of these a week. So we would have to have we would just have to leave the polls open every day.
I'm not opposed to
And,
that.
but
Every Monday morning, you can vote every
we'd have to
contract we
go
put
to,
out.
we would have to have the polls open. But
I know, we are part of a representative democracy,
Right.
so I understand that point.
And believe me, I can tell you, I hear the constituents in my neighborhood. And I got great neighborhood, you should move back. But we have a great neighborhood. And when I go out to the store and when I go out to eat, I have people come up to me and give me their opinion about the airport and every other thing.
That's great. I'm glad you're so available. That's really good. I'd say I really like living in the 18th Ward too. So
come back
I
to
like the city. I think living in lots of these wards is great. I think if we have more of a sense of working together rather than ward by ward, that would do us a lot of good too. So anyway, I need to go get my
Thank
son
you.
at school, but
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much.
for the opportunity.
Okay, so as you are leaving, I'm going to share with you all these people, entities, and government bodies that want to have input, say-so, and directives. They need to buy in to the airport. We have owned this airport for 50-some years. We have invested in it. We currently have $640 million debt, and if you want to have something to say about it, buy in. So for all those counties and all these people who have so much concern and have not cared until they now believe that there's a possibility that we could have a better airport as far as physical improvement with dollars to pay for it, and also pay off our debt, and also have funds for the city of St. Louis for infrastructure that is needed, for improvement of communities with blight, to have better job training programs, and the list goes on and on. So until all these entities that have so much to say and think they want to tell us what to do, buy in, write a check. Minimum buy-in is $500 million, based on my calculations of how much money we have spent over the last 50-some years. I don't play when it comes to money. So understand how that looks. Minimum buy-in is about $500 million for anybody that's interested. Let's move on to the rest of our agenda, please. Anything else? We have board bills before us. Airport employees are sitting out here in abundance. Let's get them out. Board Bill 119.
Good afternoon, Alderwoman, Alderwomen, Aldermen. I'm the Robert Solerano. I'm the Airport Properties Division Manager. We're requesting your approval today for the First Amendment to 7 on-airport passenger vehicle rental concession agreements with the Hertz Corporation, Avis, Budget, Enterprise Rent-A-Car doing business as Enterprise, Enterprise Leasing Company of St. Louis doing business as Alamo, Enterprise Leasing Company of St. Louis doing business as National, and Thrifty Rent-A-Car. The premises for each of these concessionaires is a counter down in the Terminal 1, and they each get shuttle pickup locations at Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. The First Amendment extends the term of the agreement 1 year. The agreements commenced January 1st, 2015. It will now end December 31st, 2020. The agreement also makes some adjustments to the successors and assigns clause, and in the case of the Hertz concession agreement, changes the notice provisions. Revenue to the airport is unchanged. Concessionaires pay a combination of the minimum annual guarantee or a percentage fee of 10%. The ACDBE participation goal on these contracts was 3%, and ACDBE utilization is as outlined in your executive summary. We respectfully request your approval of this First Amendment to 7 concession rent-a-car agreements.
Thank you very much. These are long tenants of the airport.
Each of them, yes.
Any questions, Alderman Boyd?
Again, this is a 1-year extension,
Yes, sir, till 2020.
and tell me again, what do we get out?
We
What's the
get,
increase in revenue?
no, I'm sorry, there's no increase in revenue. The rent-a-cars have paid the minimum annual guarantee. Each have a separate minimum annual guarantee plus 10% of gross receipts. So any increase in revenue would be from an increase in their business.
Okay. It's a 5-year currently, so we're going to extend it for 1 more year.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then is your anticipation next year to do another extension, or are you going to go out and open it again?
The anticipation would be go about for bid at this point. It is a 1-year extension.
Okay, and what's the point in doing a 1-year extension instead of 6 months ago going out to bid again? 1 year, it's going to take us 6 months to go through a bidding process like this as it is, and I don't think a 6-month extension would give us enough time to do another bid process like that. I'm not saying a 1-month extension. I'm saying, why not 6 months ago send it back out for bid? Instead of doing the extension, we knew the 5-year mark was approaching. Why didn't we just rebid it?
Good afternoon, Alderman. I'm Rhonda Homney-Briggy, the Airport Director. One of the things that we've been asked as we've been looking at this process is that we do 1-year extensions on contracts where we can. That's what we have done on the majority of the contracts that are contracts in good working condition and with good partners. And so this was standard in asking that we try to continue to do those one-year extensions as we've been asked to do.
Right, and that's why I asked the question, because I noticed there's a lot of one-year extensions instead of just going back out, but I'm still not clear on how that works to our advantage, since that seems to be the standard norm.
Right. And I think, we've had discussion about that. I've had discussion with the mayor's office about that, and we're looking as to whether or not that continues to make sense, but at this point, that's what we're doing. And I think the initial concern was that there was a lot, if we were already in the process of looking at privatization, a lot of vendors, very much like all of you, were asking lots of questions, and there was confusion, and so it was a little bit easier to just do the one-year extensions for the shorter term. If this continues to go on, then I think people are asking questions about that, and we'll certainly take that into consideration and see if that process should be changed. But at this point right now, that is what we're looking at, and so it would be very difficult under this one. As I said, we normally have a 9-month lead time when we look at rebidding contracts, and staff is pretty taxed right now with a lot of stuff, so we don't have the manpower to go and do some of the stuff that we would normally do.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
All right, Alderman Vaccaro.
So, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm not the smartest guy on the planet. It would seem to me, though, I got rid of it, thank God, but I had rental property. And when you're trying to sell or get rid of your rental property, you don't want to put somebody in a long-term lease because it doesn't benefit the people that are coming in that could potentially buy your house. In this case, the potential lease of the airport, and tell me if I'm wrong, I could be very wrong, but it seems to me that these one-year leases will give, if we get rid of the airport, we lease the airport, it makes it more attractive to a potential buyer, bidder, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I looked at it more as a logistics. Again, we've been asked to look at this while we're investigating this process. So we have not done long-term leases. When I think of long-term leases, I think 5, 10, 15, 20-year leases. I don't look at a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year necessarily as a long-term lease. But I think, in not knowing the exact time frame of this process, I think the ask was if we look at just 1-year extensions, that allows us an opportunity. Again, these are all contracts that are in good standing with the airport. We wouldn't do an extension of a contract not in good standing.
But tell me if I'm wrong.
I'm sorry.
Tell me if I'm wrong. Are we doing these because the potential future owners, that way they can set these leases up and make the money and do whatever? Are we doing this? To me, it just seems like, it seems like we're preparing to get rid of the airport, which I don't think is going to happen, but whatever. To me, it seems like these 1-year extensions, go to, and again, I wouldn't, if I'm going to sell my rental property, I'm not going to put somebody in a 5-year lease, because then I limit who's going to be interested in, because somebody comes along, they're going to maybe want more money for the lease than I was charging. They may say, gee, you know what, we're going to double, I'm just saying, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it just seems to me these 1-year leases, no matter how you want to hide it or do whatever, to me it seems like these are 1-year leases to keep the airport more attractive to get rid of.
That's not the reason we're doing it. We've been asked to do this I will tell you
Then we
that,
should be doing 5-year leases.
well, we don't normally do 5-year leases. We normally would do a 3-year lease in most cases. The rental car company is a longer lease because that is a large contract. So most of our contracts are 3-year leases or 3-year agreements. One of the things, all of our contracts that I'm aware of have termination clauses for 30-day termination. So whether we privatize the airport or not, those contracts could be canceled.
Well, so the 3-year leases you're talking about, they don't come to the Board of Aldermen, but yet you're here for things, because anything over 3 years requires the Board of Aldermen.
Right, this is an amendment. It was a 5-year lease to begin with, so it's an amendment. So yes, it comes back to the Board of Aldermen.
Right, so if that's not the case, why don't we go ahead and do a 5-year lease? if we're not trying to not, what, I'm just speaking
I
to
understand your
what
concerns, and-
Alderman Boyd had to say, why aren't we just go ahead and do a 5-year lease?
I understand your concerns. At this
Well,
point,
I mean,
we've
I had-
been asked to look at this and do the extensions where we can, and that's what we've been working under.
Okay, but I'll go back to Alderman Boyd's question. What is the purpose of a 1-year lease versus a month or 3-4 months ago coming back to us with a 5-year lease? If the privatization thing wasn't out there, I bet we'd be doing a 5-year lease.
We would.
Okay, that's what, thank you, that's what I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Alderman Muhammad,
No questions, Madam Chair.
Alderman Oldenburg. No questions. Alderwoman Middlebrook.
No questions.
Thank you. I'm just going to add to that. We have an operating procedure in this process as far as privatization is concerned. The airport and its operations are a part of that process. It is important for us to have our due diligence in place so that we are not dealing with unnecessary things, no matter which way it is in the end. That is the standard procedure for any corporation that is looking at a buyout or merger or anything. That's how the process is handled. Do you have anything else?
Requesting approval of the amendment.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion that we
Please do.
pass Board Bill 119 out with the due pass recommendation.
Second.
Moved in, huh?
No, I thought he was gonna say previous roll. I was moving ahead of him.
Okay, great. So we have it moved in second. Can we call the roll, please?
Alderman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderman Moore, Alderman Vaccaro, Alderman Cone, Alderman Muhammad,
No.
Alderman Oldenburg, Alderwoman Middlebrook,
Aye.
Chair Lady Davis.
Aye.
5 aye votes and 1 no vote.
Thank you. Okay, so we have, let's do 3 bills here. Let's do Alderwoman Spencer. So you have 3 bills before us. Would you like to take Board Bill 19 first?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the 2019 Transportation and Commerce Committee. I guess we'll take Board Bill 19 before us. Before we get started, I did want to acknowledge that we have here with us several members of the business community that have expressed interest in this process. I think that's a very good and healthy place for us to be engaging in our business community. Board Bill 19, a bill that would require a public vote in the event that we, as a city, move forward with the privatization of St. Louis Lambert International Airport, our city's largest public physical asset. There's been a little bit of confusion about the bill, amendments, et cetera, so I'm going to go ahead and we have before us the committee substitute, is that right?
Wait a minute, I must have missed something.
Well, in any case, why don't we do this? I will go ahead and give an overview of the bill. I know I've described some of this to the committee before, but
Hold on. We have a committee substitute, we have a marked copy and a clean copy. Is that right?
I think there was some confusion between our counsel and clerk on the bill itself. I have several copies here if we want to take a look at the original clean copy. We can do that. I also have a board bill as amended with a couple of these. The committee may remember there were a couple of non-consequential amendments to be made to the sort of whereas clauses that did not change at all the substance of the bill.
So are you saying, I want to make sure everybody has what you want us to have in front of us?
Any which way, the bill that you have in front of you will work because, again, none of the changes that were made have any real consequential changes to the bill. I should actually have perhaps not confused the committee by mentioning that. Great.
But we do have 2 documents in front of us.
Great. The bill, we'll look at 19, which is the bill that would require a public vote if the city moves forward with the privatization of Lambert.
Okay.
Okay.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, do we have, I don't have Board Bill 19.
Yeah, we don't have
I have a committee substitute.
We have, it says 19 committee substitute.
Board Bill 19.
So you want us to look at Board Bill 19, not the committee substitutes?
Chairwoman, it doesn't matter which one we look at, really, because
Oh, but it does.
the changes are so small, they're just little wording changes. So please look at Board Bill 19.
She said look at 19. You have to do what the sponsor says.
They're all the same. Okay, again, let's start from the beginning. What we have before us is Board Bill 19, the ordinance that would require a public vote in the event we move forward with the privatization of our airport. Most airports in the United States are publicly owned. In fact, just all but one of them are. This means that they can finance improvements tax-free with municipal bonds and enjoy other public ownership perks. This is different than the perks that are involved in Europe and other parts of the world. Because the federal government puts so much money into our airports, providing hundreds of millions of dollars in grants every year, they do not allow airports to take federal infrastructure and profit on them. But St. Louis Lambert is unique in several different ways. One of which is that we were grandfathered into a revenue sharing agreement, which means that we are one of just 12 airports in the nation that gets a profit out of our airport, almost $7 million a year. We also have a very significant amount of debt, $600 million. Those two things combined are big hurdles that would have to be overcome by a private operator who would then be able to generate a profit on top of those two unique and unusual circumstances that Lambert has. As I mentioned, we are one of the publicly owned airports in our country. There are 457 publicly owned airports in the United States, and as I mentioned, we are one of only 12 that has that revenue profit sharing agreement. So in order for us to discuss why it's important for the public to engage in the question of whether or not we should privatize, we must first briefly describe what privatization actually is and how it's worked elsewhere. In 1996, Congress established the Airport Privatization Pilot Program. Participation in the program has been very limited, in part because major stakeholders have different, if not contrary, objectives and interests. In fact, only 2 U.S. commercial service airports have completed the privatization process established under the federal program. One of those, Stewart International Airport in upstate New York, has subsequently reverted back to public ownership. This was not done easily, in fact, nor was it done inexpensively. Taxpayers in New York had to foot the bill of an estimated $78 million, and that is for a very small airport compared to Lambert. The other airport, of course, is in San Juan, Puerto Rico, an airport that can hardly be compared to Lambert because of its underlying economic system there, which was largely in shambles. There was no way for the Puerto Rican government to bond out the money they needed to come back after major infrastructure demolitions because of hurricanes. We don't have that problem here. In fact, just a couple of months ago, we approved hundreds of millions of dollars in bonded debt for our airport because it is doing quite well. As I mentioned, Stewart was a disaster in its privatization process. It is literally the only airport on mainland United States that has fully privatized. Now, being a cash-strapped city, as St. Louis is often described as, and certainly is, it's easy to be allured by the promise of cash windfalls to pursue public-private partnerships with this goal in mind. Our friends in Chicago did this recently with parking, and now we have what is largely considered one of the most disastrous public-private partnerships in the country. Even that city who pulled that disastrous trigger tried twice to privatize their airports and decided against it. Privatization refers to the shifting of government functions, responsibilities, and sometimes entire ownership in whole or in part to the private sector. Many public airports privatize many aspects of their airport without handing over the full reins. For example, service contracts, many U.S. airports, including Lambert, outsource many non-core operations such as landscaping, concessions, and other things that we've done here and have engaged in quite well. If what we wanted to do was improve functions at Lambert, we could do so under privatization in a partial sense. In fact, we could even hand over the entire management of our airport under a partial privatization model that would still leave the public asset in the hands of the public. AV Airports out of Virginia, for example, has management service contracts with a number of airports, including Albany International, Westchester County, et cetera. In fact, an entire terminal in Chicago, Terminal 5, and Terminal 4 in New York, JFK, are examples of those pretty significant partial privatizations. But of course, even those have concerns and potential pitfalls. As we have recently seen in Denver, that major significant privatization effort has collapsed, and it is estimated to cost Denver taxpayers upwards of $200 million to take that back. The city of St. Louis, as we know, could not withstand that type of reversal. It would necessarily bankrupt our city if we went involved and got involved in a privatization agreement that failed. Other important considerations, of course, public operators are, as I mentioned earlier, eligible for federal grants and major infrastructure improvements. Rates and charges on airlines under under privatization. Those rates and for airlines can change under the private operator, but under our current public ownership, those rates can only rise with a cap. And the consent of the airlines involved. So what we would be doing is potentially putting our airport in a unique position to have fluctuating prices that are would no longer be capped under federal standards. My concern here really, we have, as was mentioned before, we had a member of the public show up. I have been on the receiving end of a lot of concern from the general public about the process involved, the lack of community engagement, and just a general confusion about what we're trying to do here. If what we wanted to do was just improve the airport, that could certainly be done under a partial privatization process without being a guinea pig in the nation for privatizing our entire airport. I think airports are the railroads, essentially, of the 21st century. And with this process, I think what we're doing really is looking at our transportation future, our assets here. We know that the world economy is increasingly traveling by air. International air traffic is projected to double within the next 20 years. And large airports here in the Midwest are really choked, and they are really landlocked in their ability to grow. In fact, Dallas, Chicago, and Denver are all leading the nation in delays and canceled flights. And we are really poised uniquely to be a leader in the growing international air capacity that the country will certainly need. We have not one, but two international airports. We have Mid-America right across the river, which is bisected by the nation's largest river, which has the second largest inland port in the country. We could be having a Hyperloop here in St. Louis very soon. So as we look at our airport's future, we should be looking at creating a regional transportation development plan, a regional airport authority perhaps, or some other regional entity to coordinate the growth of all modes of transportation here in the St. Louis region. Most importantly, we need to be looking at this decision as a way of putting our city back on, yes.
Could I ask you to speak more directly to the board bill?
I will.
Madam Chair, while you interrupt, I just want this to be on the record. I have to leave. I gotta pick up my kid. Can I be excused?
You may.
Thank you.
We'll miss you, Alderman, from the 21st. Thank you for your questions previously. If you have any questions of me, you know where to find me.
Absolutely.
I'll wrap this up. We are asking, should we privatize our airport? But this is the wrong question to be asking. We should be asking, not can we make a quick buck for our city, but how can our region's aviation's assets be used to maximize the growth of our regional economy? And putting this question before the general public opens up this process to public discourse that we haven't seen thus far. And I think that providing a path for public engagement that relies on the public to help us make a decision at the end of the day is most prudent at this point. The question has come before the committee, has been declared that this bill may in fact only result in an advisory vote, a non-binding vote. And I say that is just fine by me, because if the general public weighs in by way of a vote and decides that they would want to privatize the airport, for example, and their elected official then has to go and cast a vote at the board, the non-binding vote will certainly be advisory, and it would necessarily advise our elected officials in how to participate at the Board of Aldermen and within the Board of E&A. Even though it may not be considered binding, and that is yet to be determined, that is a legal opinion that was issued, perhaps, it will still foster a public engagement and a public discourse that would be very healthy and very instructive in the process. And so for that reason, and not only that, the general public has really just come forward with the desire to participate in this decision. I think we ought to be expanding it well beyond the closed doors, which we have seen a lot of the discussion having to take place. And I welcome a public conversation on the matter, and I hope the committee agrees. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I will entertain questions, of course, from any member of the committee.
Alderman Boyd.
Were we going to put the substitute before us, or just go ahead and talk from this?
Well, the Alderman said she wanted to do Board Bill 19, not the committee substitute.
Okay.
Well, we can't because the committee substitute, I was looking at the agenda, 19's on the agenda, not the committee substitute, and the committee substitutes have to be introduced
Right.
48 hours or whatever is
Right.
prior to the meeting, so
That's
we
right.
can't
So-
consider that.
So what we have is Board Bill 19, which was the bill put on the agenda by the chairwoman. We had several amendments, which we did discuss previously in your committee, that were very small and wording only in nature. They do not, again, they do not change the substance of the bill. And if the chairwoman would like to have Board Bill 19 before us, the amendments, and an as-amended version, if they so pass, we can proceed in that manner.
So you have an amendment as well?
The amendments that we have discussed previously that were requested by the committee that acknowledge that the airport privatization pilot program did change its name when Congress reauthorized the FAA in October of 2018 and included provisions that changed just a little bit the airport privatization pilot program, including its name.
Okay, so.
You may remember we went through this at the last committee hearing.
I do remember that. So we should have done the amendment first. I didn't realize we had an amendment over there.
There was some confusion. I was going along with the staff here on this, and of course what was put on the agenda. So.
The law clerk screwed her, that's all I can say. The law clerk didn't put her stuff on there.
But it is shown as committee substitute.
Okay.
Are you planning on taking a vote? That would be the first thing. Because if you're not, we can get a clean committee substitute and come back and do this the right process.
So if I may, the clean committee substitute is before you already.
No, it's not on the agenda. See, it wasn't given to the clerk so that it could be on the agenda. There's a process, because I didn't even know this existed.
I think it was emailed when we went through this last time.
No, not to me.
I'm just talking about procedure. My name's on the bill.
Right,
I know.
You're talking about procedure.
But I'm just talking
Unfortunately,
about
it wasn't
procedure.
followed.
Well, there were several, so there's two options. One would be the committee substitute before the committee. The second option would be the clean bill. with the amendments.
You would have to do
And the
amendment
as amended.
one by one, or we just come back.
I do have a list of amendments, so they're very small in nature again, so we're just striking the word airport and privatization pilot, and changing it with the words investment partnership. Again, that's that change that the FAA made. And again, they're all related to that. It's just those instances in the bill where the term was changed by the FAA. So it's really, really minor. It's the most minor change you could possibly think of.
It's not minor, it's the law, and the bill needs to reference the law. That's not minor.
Okay. Well, again, if there was some confusion by the staff on this issue, I apologize. But it is, yeah.
Procedurally, we can't.
Let me start with Alderman Boyd, please. Alderman Boyd.
Yeah.
I'm just going to work with the committee and see what you guys going to do.
Well, I just want to make a comment about the process that we're in right now. In the past week, I've been alarmed by some comments that were made in reference to our process. And I will just read a few comments from the Post-Dispatch dated, I guess the 19th. I think it was maybe Friday, but it says, I think there's a place for perhaps a more transparent look at this, said Denny Coleman, interim director of the Port Authority and a longtime economic development official. Another piece says, St. Louis County Executive Sam Page, spokesman, said in a statement Friday that the airport is a regional asset. Whether its governance should be regional as well is a good question that should be considered. Meanwhile, an opinion piece published in the St. Louis Business Journal this week, St. Charles County Executive Steve Elman said the decision on privatization of the region's most valuable asset would be made by a city that now contains just 12% of the metro area's population, yet most of the airport's users, which fund its operations, come from outside the city. Then it got even better. On the 24th of October, Mr. Traker, St. Louis County councilman, in a resolution dated 10/22 says, whereas St. Louis Lambert International Airport, the airport, is one of the most important portals of our region's economic growth and tourism, and is instrumental in allowing local companies of all sizes to compete both nationally and internationally. And whereas the airport is an important regional asset serving the travel needs of people from throughout eastern Missouri, including residents of St. Louis City, St. Louis County, Jefferson County, and St. Charles County. Whereas while the city of St. Louis owns the airport, it is located entirely within the St. Louis County. And whereas the administration of the city of St. Louis has been conducting closed, non-transparent studies with the objective of determining whether the airport should be privatized, and such studies have been conducted without any public scrutiny or input, and whereas this secretive effort to privatize the airport is being entirely funded by a St. Louis billionaire who has reportedly been paying a group of hand-paid consultants upwards of $800,000 per month for many months in order to further the effort. And whereas no documents, meeting minutes, economic impact studies, accounting reports, or any other materials pertaining to the contemplated privatization of the airport have been provided to neighboring government officials in the region or to the public. And whereas the administration of the city of St. Louis has declared that it's not obligated to hold a public vote on the privatization of the airport, either among St. Louis City voters or among citizens of the region, and has said that even such a vote was held, it would only be advisory and that they would not be bound by the result. Now, therefore, be resolved by the County Council of St. Louis County, Missouri, as follows. Section 1, the St. Louis County Council strongly urges the city of St. Louis to conduct itself with openness and transparency in all matters concerning the privatization of the airport. As St. Louis County has done in an effort to build trust with the public in the wake of serious criminal conduct from the previous St. Louis County administration. Section 2, the County Council strongly encourages the city of St. Louis to release all documents pertaining to the privatization of the airport, including minutes of meetings, records of transactions and conversations, accounting reports, and economic impact studies. Section 3, the County Council strongly urges the City of St. Louis to put before the registered voters of the City of St. Louis a non-binding referendum to either accept or reject the proposed privatization of the airport, and to call for and support similar referenda being put before St. Louis County, Jefferson County, and St. Louis County voters, all of which would go a long way towards acknowledging and respecting the rights and interests of all people in the St. Louis region who depend upon the airport. Now, that being read, Madam Chairwoman, I'm just kind of curious. Was this meeting posted in time for anybody to participate and appear before the committee to hear about the 3-1 Fly project?
Oh, sure.
It was?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And all the meetings that have been conducted thus far were by state law, were they publicized in a way that people knew about the meetings?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and are there documents that are online or in print somewhere that are accessible to the
It
public?
is so many documents online.
Okay, so I obviously there's some confusion. And I would really appreciate if we could call upon Mr. Denny Coleman, County Exec Sam Page, and County Executive Steve Elman, if they would appear before the committee to speak on this bill, to demonstrate their support for it and how we have kind of missed something. I really would appreciate hearing from them, since this is a regional effort in which they are saying, please come before us and talk about why we should listen to what they have to say. Because this is a regional effort. I mean, the St. Louis International Airport serves this whole region. The city of St. Louis, by the way, are indebted over $600 million. I haven't heard anybody adding anything, and I just really think out of fairness, out of transparency, because obviously they don't think that we've been transparent, that they will please be encouraged to appear before this body and encourage us and talk to us and have dialogue about how we continue to move in the process. I would
Chairwoman,
really
if I
ask
may?
respectfully if that can happen before we take a vote on these bills today.
Madam Chairwoman, if I may, as the sponsor of the bill, I would welcome that conversation, and I would welcome our regional leaders to come before and ask questions and be a part of the process. I think that's an excellent suggestion by the alderman from the 22nd Ward, and I would respectfully defer my bills until we have a more regional conversation about it.
Then I would bring in, I think that'll help clean up that committee substitute. You can keep my name on there too, but I think that cleans up. I do have a comment based off what Jeffrey said.
Okay, can you hold on a second?
Sure.
Are you done?
I'm requesting that they appear before the committee if they're really, truly interested in this process.
So
I want to
let's-
make sure that they have every opportunity
Let's just
to
start
speak to
making a
us.
list, because I'm trying to get the committee's pulse here, because I don't want to say anything, because I'm a little upset. So Alderman Boyd, anything else?
No, those three people.
Okay. Alderman Vaccaro.
No, I have a comment based off of what Alderman Boyd said, and thank you, Alderman Spencer, for, not rushing this process and doing it. I know you weren't for the Scott, or whatever they call it now, the hockey place, but the county,
Scott Trade Center, formerly?
well, now it's called the Enterprise Center, whatever it is. But the county still is yet, even though they celebrated, made all the money that you could make off hotels and everything else, they've yet to say, they weren't very interested in being very regional when it came to helping pay, what it took to get that thing up to date. In fact, they didn't put anything in it. The state did, we did,
We've been paying for
and it would have been really nice if, while they're on the regional thing, maybe we can get them to put some money into some of these city stadiums and stuff so that we don't bear the full burden, because the people that come here and the people that we're celebrating, it was very regional, yet we're bearing the cost. So I'm glad that they're thinking regionally, and if, Mark, if you print that, that's great. Glad to see them thinking regionally for us.
Madam
Tell them we'll be looking forward to some help on some of the stadiums.
Wow, okay.
And I'm with, again, I think the Alderwoman for being willing to hold on to this just a little bit longer.
Okay, so next is Alderman Oldenburg.
I don't have any questions, Chairwoman, other than I think I kind of agree with the sentiments here. I think that there's going to be a regional perspective. Let's wait and hear from those who represent various constituents in the region. You know, if a vote is in fact a survey, let's hear from them in order to get a regional pulse. I think that's a good step forward for the city to say we're committed to cooperating on regionalism in an asset. That being said, also, let us not forget the city owns that asset. And it makes us probably then a very large landowner in St. Louis County. So, yeah, let's hear from those leaders of that area regarding our process here.
Can I add one more thing? While we're asking them, why don't we ask them to help us pay for the vote? That would be really nice. If they want to, and we can have a vote across the nation if they want, but it's very expensive. Maybe while they're thinking regionally, they could help us pay for the vote to put this on the ballot on what would be considered a non-binding referendum.
I'm sorry, I said I didn't have any questions, but I actually kind of do of the sponsor, if that's okay. I mean, Alderwoman Spencer, I know that this has been a pursuit of yours, and I applaud you for that. Can you talk to me about, because I feel like at the moment there is a lot of interconnectedness to a couple of the bills that you have on the agenda today, and I feel like that they really are, even though we take bills up separately here, I really do feel like there's an interconnectedness to talk about. Is there an ability to table these bills that are interconnected here, what I would say is 1977 and 93, so that as a collective committee here, that we can avoid some of this confusion, so that we can, to use your words, so that we can clearly provide a path that involves public engagement. Because I think I support that getting some weigh-in from the citizenry, but also the larger region and the businesses that are impacted by this too. And I just don't feel like we've had that yet to move forward. And is there an ability for you to be open or perceptive to tabling the three bills you have here, so that this committee can work on them with you, so we come out of committee with zero confusion, as a united committee here, and ideally I will work with you to get a unanimous vote on these bills, so that we come out with bill that makes sense to pursue that public engagement or that public vote process.
Sure, I don't think we need to table the bills in order to achieve that. We can certainly defer the bills until we can engage in that process. I don't think that tabling them necessarily gets us there, but certainly I've always been available to work with you or any member of the committee.
Well, I think tabling them doesn't, I mean, effectively, I think that preserves your bills, just to say. In essence, it doesn't kill them. What it does is it allows and forces this committee to do that very important work on coming out of committee with consensus on the right public engagement path. So that's why I was asking.
I would not be in favor of tabling the bills. What I would consider doing is putting them on hold. You know, I don't think that we want to table the bills. I don't think that's the right mechanism here. Certainly they have sat on the calendar for 7 months now, I think, or 6 months. Certainly leaving them there leaves all options open. I think that's the appropriate way to move forward in a collaborative manner. They are interrelated. We have one bill which would be an ordinance requiring a public vote. The second would be one that would be a charter amendment change to require a public vote. And then the third is a direction to city government to apply for what became a federally available grant in the amount of $750,000. It became available when Congress reauthorized FAA and slightly changed some of those provisions of the privatization pilot program to overlay with a study that would be available to the public before a decision would be made, unlike the work that's being done right now, which, as we heard earlier, would not be something that the public could really engage in. One of the issues is not that the paperwork hasn't been available to the public. The issue is that the paperwork that we're given is of no substance, very little substance. So there's really not a lot that we can really gauge what this would actually do for the city, residents, and the region as a whole. So I think from that perspective, that third bill would come in play to help us really parse through some of the particulars here that we're looking at and the objectives of this process. So I would not be in favor of tabling the bills, but I would, of course, be available to work with you and the entire committee to get that unanimous consent that you're looking for.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, I just would like to be more part of it, and I feel like if we move to table this bill and it receives favorable consideration, there'll be the good amount of work that all of us, I mean, Alderman Mohammed has stipulated that he doesn't feel like he's been part of the process in the dark. I feel like that would cinch us, all of us, to come out with what is a very fine bill that brings a vote or brings a public engagement process to the people.
The tabling of the bills, I think, would be sort of confrontational to the bills and contrary to their intent. I don't see the need really to table them. Again, they exist on the calendar untouched, and we can continue to leave them there as we work through some of the issues that you have. Again, I mean, tabling bills would really present a challenge then to getting them out of committee. I really don't think we need to present an unnecessary challenge to the bills at this point. And I think leaving them as is something I'm amenable to, obviously. Working with the alderman from the 22nd, with yourself, alderman from the 16th, on addressing some of those issues.
Okay.
And especially, I mean, considering, this is really the first hearing related to our airport that members of the business community have been participating in.
It's not.
This is the first Transportation Committee hearing that I'm aware of, that I participated in personally on my bills.
And everybody at these meetings.
Understood. Again, I think we have new voices that are participating. The alderman from the 22nd mentioned several that are weighing in the media sense. That's a very good thing. I will agree that putting them on the side is amenable path forward, but tabling them really says to the public that we don't really want to hear these right now. And I think that would be an
I would disagree with that. I would say that it says that the work of this committee wants to come forward with a public engagement process, because I think the alderman from 22nd voiced concern that he'd like to hear from some more regional leaders, before this committee, takes some action on those bills. And is that something that you would agree that
Sure.
This committee would hear from those leaders before it takes action on it?
I would agree that would be a path forward and one that I would support. We haven't tabled bills at the Board of Aldermen here, to my knowledge. I'm unaware of that procedure being used for any bill.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also
an unnecessary step, one that isn't necessary to move forward in the path described by the alderman from the 22nd and the path described by you, alderman from the 16th.
Sure. Okay.
So I urge the committee not to consider such an unusual maneuver, an unusual step that is unnecessary to achieving the goals stated before us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's provided within our rules, so I think from a
definitely is.
procedural matter,
Sure.
I would argue is that it sits this committee, who is tasked with doing the work of transportation and commerce, with coming up with a bill that achieves precisely what I think you're trying to.
It's an unnecessary a move that isn't necessary, and it would be the first time I would be aware of that happening in my entire 5 years down here.
Banner day down at the Board of Aldermen some days.
So, you've spoken, I'm sorry, I got lost. My child needs something. Alderwoman Middlebrook?
I have no comments.
I have a couple of comments. So, where did all this come from about the business community has never had any input, knows nothing about the process, has never been talked to. Where is all of this coming from?
I will take ownership for that entirely myself.
That's really, this is the problem that I have with us having the ability to do good things on behalf of the city. When we put all this bad misinformation out here, it's not healthy to the public. Then we get the public all riled up about something that is not true. And not only is it not true, you didn't even ask anybody. And then aside from that, if you look, and all those people who talk about social media all the time, it's right on there who we've talked to. So I don't understand why all of a sudden we're saying, oh, it's so wonderful that now we have people from the business community involved, because they've always been involved from day one. So you need to explain that a little bit more and clear it up for the public who's going to be looking at this.
Okay, well, I can't speak to individuals. What I will say is that my experience in talking, there's the business community in St. Louis is so large and so varied. So I will say that there may have been some involvement. The feedback I'm getting, which is limited to my direct communication with folks, but is that people across the city, the region, are feeling that they are not involved in the process. And so, again, that's not individuals, that's just a general sentiment. I'll take ownership for that. And Madam Chairwoman, if you've been engaging in the business community in a productive manner, I certainly congratulate the efforts of the committee in that manner and the process in that manner. Certainly it hasn't been the general sentiment that I've understood, but certainly none of us have talked to every member of the business community or the general public to gauge that entire perspective. But I think we can all agree that many members of the public, as the alderman from the 22nd mentioned, several have felt left out of the process, have been left out of the process, and have not been engaged to a level at which they feel comfortable at this point.
And that is up to that individual alderperson to determine how much time and effort that they want to be involved in order to support their community. All meetings are public. I know I'm available to anybody to answer any questions that they may have. So is all the members of the working group. There is nothing that could not be answered if someone simply asked a question. And if they didn't want to ask a question directly to an individual, just go online and read it. So everybody needs to stop it. Just simply stop it. This is not the time. This city needs too much. This region needs too much. This is not the time for all this nonsense. It is not. Now, you have 3 different bills here. I thought that was a good recommendation to try to pull all this together so that we'll have something comprehensive. It's not getting the community all confused with all this different stuff. And I definitely want to bring those folks in here. Because, see, if they want to have some say-so, write a check. That's how I see that. And if you don't write a check, go somewhere and sit down and shut up. So wait a minute, where were we at? Sit down so I can get my head together. I don't want you to leave. I'm trying to get my head together. So, are you making a motion?
Well, I mean, I think in light of things, I mean, would this committee entertain that, is what I would like to say, is that can we table Board Bill 19, is I think so. I would move that we table Board Bill 19.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and second to table Board Bills 19, 77, and what is that? 93. Please call the roll.
Can we have a discussion on that?
Oh, yeah, you can have a discussion. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
If we do this, can we still have the people come?
Oh, definitely.
I'm interested in
Yes.
hearing the kind of.
Because we need their input to put in all of this, too.
The difference would be.
Or not.
We could still move
We
forward.
want them here
Okay,
to hear
all
what they
right.
got to say. It may have some,
Bill in
it
this
may have
committee.
some influence on this, or not.
Okay.
It would take 2/3 of this
And we
group to bring it back out.
We'll bring it back out. We got to.
Okay.
Call the roll, please.
Alderman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderman Moore, Alderman Vaccaro,
Aye.
Alderman Cone, Alderman Muhammad, Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Aye.
Chairwoman Davis.
Aye.
5 aye votes.
Thank you. There's a couple of more items at the end of the agenda, and I think it's just asking you if you have any other suggestions or comments for the committee to do work. I still haven't done your tour yet, and I got to do that. I know. So Rhonda, please send me 2 dates we can choose from for the tour for the committee.
I'm sorry.
Could you please send us 2 dates for the tour for the committee?
Yes, ma'am.
So we can choose from it.
Yes,
I
Chairwoman.
appreciate that. Anything else?
Do you have preference on days of the week by any chance that might be better for the committee?
Mondays are usually better because we don't normally have committee meetings on Monday.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But we do Tuesday, Wednesdays, and, or use my date, Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Noted. Okay.
Yeah. Okay?
Understand all the more reason.
Anything
to make sure
else?
then that we come up with a great,
Hearing nothing, meeting is adjourned.
it's not on my